I've been working behind the scenes since early December on Jupiter Broadcasting's next big show, and I'll share my secrets for planning the ultimate podcast in this week's episode of An In-Depth Look. This week's episode, I've got a whole bunch of questions that you guys have sent in that I've sat on for a while, but I'm finally getting around to answering, and they're all about starting a podcast. And I thought the best thing to do would be to bring my wife Angela on, who runs the business side of Jupiter Broadcasting. Hey there, sweetie.
Hello.
Hello. She's in the faux HD TV screen because we thought that'd be fancy. And Angela, do you want to read the first question that was sent in to us?
Yeah, sure. What is the most important thing to starting a podcast?
Oh, yes. Yeah, put that one up at number one because really, if you don't walk away with anything else from this, consider this. You need to cover a topic you're extremely passionate about, something that can get you through the rough, slow times, something that you can just draw from and just sit down in front of a mic and go is ideal. For example, the whole reason we started the Linux Action Show or Beer is Tasty is because those were subjects that Brian and I were just sitting around BSing about all the time anyways, always reading about, always interested in, and we knew if we sat down and just put our heads together, we could come up with a way to do a show. So for us, it was like passion seed, something that you can take and water and grow into a beautiful podcast tree. And that's a pretty important part.
Yeah. Also, having enough content, That's why I started the faux show. It's all about funny stuff. And I'm never going to run out of funny stuff, funny or interesting stuff. But, if you choose a topic that, there's not going to be anything to cover in a couple months, then you may want to rethink your overall, idea.
Mm-hmm. Like a podcast just about PAX, which is only an event that happens every twice a year. That would be really rough.
Right.
So you want to have something that gives you, that's great, something you have a lot of runway with.
Yeah, something lucrative.
All right, what's the next question?
All right, the next question is a viewer wanted to know, how does it need to be packaged? Then how do you know how it needs to be packaged for your audience?
You got to ask yourself some fundamental truths. Will your show work better as an audio show, or will your show work better as a video show? Start there. And I'll tell you, I've been working since early December on a new show that has gone through a lot of different iterations. At first, it was called Geek Basement. Then it was called Conspiracy Bacon. And now it's being called Unfiltered.
Mm-hmm. And it hasn't even been released yet. We haven't even recorded a test show.
And every time I refine it, I get a little bit different and a little bit better understanding of how I think the show is going to work. And I'm actually leaning towards doing an audio show because I want to take away the distraction of video, and I want to make it something where people sort of use their own mind to draw the images and to really critically think about things. And so for me, for the format of the show, I believe it better serves it to be audio, but there's other things that work better as video. So you got to figure out that key thing and where your audience is going to be. Are they going to be commuters or are they going to be YouTubers? For example, all of our long format shows over at Jupiter Broadcasting, they do better actually in audio form. But the short stuff, like an in-depth look and things like that are like 20 minutes or less, they do better as video. So that's an important thing to consider as well.
Speaking of determining the audience, that is the next thing. Who are the peers? Who are you going to target new people to whatever topic you're going to do? Or are you going for the, the high tech, professionals that know a lot of what you're talking about but want to know more?
Yeah, who's the target audience kind of thing is important too, because you can kind of fall in that trap of over-explaining to your audience and talking down and treating them like they don't know the topic better than you do. And that's especially difficult with things like the Linux Action Show, because a lot of times the people watching know the topic better than we do. There's also just as equally amount of people that don't know the topic at all. And so you kind of have to walk that line, and you don't want to piss people off by talking down to them. So consider, is it a group of your peers? Is it people that you want? Is it people that have already seen the light and they agree with you on this topic that, sporks are the best invention ever, and yes, I'd want to listen to a podcast? Or are they people that don't really understand? That's a critical thing, and I would say that's topic depending. All right. You have any thoughts?
Yep. No, not on that one. But
all right, next question.
The next question is, how do you determine if you need a co-host or if you should have one at all?
Oh, yeah. The co-host problem is tough. You got to figure out timing with another person, like scheduling the show. You got to figure out their equipment, if they have the bandwidth, especially if they're not local. If they're going to be in studio with you, it's a little easier. But if you're doing it like over Skype You got to make sure that they've got a good microphone on their end. They don't have a noisy environment. That they can do it at the same time. You can do it at that they have an interest in the topic, how you're going to divide the workload. All of those things are really important. And honestly, sometimes you have to ask yourself, do you even need a co-host? When I started working on Unfiltered, it was going to be just me. Nobody else was going to be on the show. And as I sort of retweaked and modified the content and brought new elements in, I kind of decided, okay, now I need somebody else to play off of. And now I do want a co-host. So, I've got like 3 or 4 people that I have in mind that I think would make good co-hosts. And now I just kind of have to go through all of those things. Do they have input on the topics? Are they, well-read on this particular subject? And do they have the audio equipment to sound really good? And then do they have the time? So all things you got to think about. But in general, I think whenever you can do it with another person, it's usually a show has a little more energy.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to consider, you focused on the audio only part there at the end, but visually, do they match the presentation that your company is trying to project? Does that matter? Is it more important that they match the audience that you are trying to reach? For example, if we did a new gaming show, would you watch it if a guy in a business suit was was hosting it? No, probably not. You want to see, like the OMG Jeremy
shirts,
shirts about retro games and whatever, or funny sayings.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but maybe it doesn't match the overall projection of the company, but that's what works for that show.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, we have another question.
Yes, we do. Do you have the hardware you need?
Oh, well, of course, Jupiter Broadcasting has the hardware we need. But this is a question I'll turn around on you, Ange. Do you think there's a lot of hardware required to do a podcast? I mean, what's your impression of that now that you've seen all this?
Yes.
Especially video.
I pay the bills. So yes, there's plenty of hardware. There's a lot of hardware.
Yeah. That's because we're doing video, we're doing green screen.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if you're doing audio, you really need a Rode Podcaster and a sound recording software.
Mm-hmm.
Audacity would do. I mean, if you're doing audio only and it's just you, the requirements go from 100 different things to really 3 different things. I mean, it's way better.
And you have to consider, back to the whole, do I have a co-host or not? You might need to provide them with the right audio means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something you might have to do. They might not be all in on it, but they might be the best thing for your show. And so you need to provide them the best equipment so that you can put out a quality production.
Now, Peregrine Falcon in the JBLive.tv chat room is saying plenty of podcasts have very limited hardware. How does having a lot of hardware make your podcast better? I would say it depends on the podcast. Having all of this hardware makes Stoked really good because we can do these 1080p, full resolution, 60 frames per second, visual captures of the game and just really make the game look good.
Mm-hmm.
For the Linux Action Show, the core concept of the show hasn't really changed since we were recording it in Brian's living room with just some basic mics. So I wouldn't get hung up on the hardware. In fact, I would say people too frequently get hung up on the hardware and kind of hang out in this, I need the right tool to do the job land, and don't just actually move on to getting the show done. I would always say, if you can, you might consider starting audio because the limits there are much less, and you can always upgrade to video later on. It's much harder to go from video to audio only. People feel like you're taking something away. So if you start with audio, you start building an audience, people start to like it, you could always upgrade later on. Kind of like what I'm considering doing with the new Unfiltered shows. If it grows a lot and we start getting requests for video, I'll probably expand out to some sort of video show from there.
The other thing that that having more hardware does is it provides a more professional appearance. We look really professional, I think. And you can do it without a big, with a green screen and whatever. But as long as you have an interesting background in whatever room you're doing it in. But you just have to always focus on the presentability of whatever it is that's around you. And sometimes that does require more hardware.
Yeah. Yeah, and more hardware will help me, do things like make you sound better, make you look better.
Mm-hmm.
But really, at the end, if you don't have the content to match, it doesn't really matter. And, you just have to play with that and see what works best for your show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have another question.
All right, the next question is, do you have the time for a new podcast? Can you stick it to every single week? Or, can your co-host do that as well?
Yeah. That's a great consideration, and probably an addendum to that. I think people probably want to know is how frequently should you make the show? Is it really important to be weekly? I think it is. I think establishing that habitual routine with the audience is important. Plus, people are really sensitive to investing their time in your show. It's the most valuable thing they have, and they never have any more of it. They can never earn any more time. And so even for a subject they really interested in, they won't necessarily invest the time, and they especially won't do it. And just think of yourself. Think of like TV shows or other radio programs you've watched. You won't really invest yourself in it if you don't know it's reliable. Like for me, huge fan of Dollhouse. But when they announced they were ending Dollhouse, I just quit watching. If it's not going anywhere, why would I watch? The same thing applies to podcasts. If you don't produce something on a reliable set schedule, people won't tune in. And if you're going to be live, you have to factor in a reliable set time for you to record, and you have to factor in that release time. And if you have a co-host or multiple co-hosts, you have to factor in their availability on top of that. So it's definitely something to consider, because I think a reliable weekly podcast is pretty key.
Yep. In addition, always try to have a backup co-host. Try to have something or some other kind of fallback if that person is not available, because life happens. If life happens over and over again, okay, maybe you need somebody completely new. But otherwise, have a backup or something that can fill the void of a missing host.
Yeah, or be prepared. If you have to, be prepared to do it yourself on a 1 week or something like that. And maybe, just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking of the format of the show. All right, we have another question.
Yeah, Dayhawk in the chat room says, when you do just audio, is it best to have still images for YouTube or something with motion like jump backs?
Oh, so we do this with SciByte, right? It's an audio, primarily audio show, 3 weeks a month with a video on the 4th week. But the 3 weeks when it's audio only, we release a video companion. I call it like audio enhanced or whatever, where there's the visuals of the news story we're covering. If there's video clips, we'll put them in there and things like that. I like that because there's some people who only watch on YouTube, and there's some people who will still download the video just to have the visual guides to go along with it. You're not going to... I would say don't expect to go gangbusters on a video site doing an audio podcast that has slides with it. You're not going to go gangbusters there. It's there really just for those people who want to watch it. But it works. It's actually proven to be semi-successful for us. I mean, it's done better than I expected for SciByte, and it continues to do better every single week. So it's definitely possible. It's a good question.
And that leads into the next question that was pre-prepared, and that was, how do I syndicate my podcast?
Yeah, it really does matter. It matters if it's video or audio. That's a big part, because if it's video, you definitely probably want to put it on YouTube. And if it's audio only, you really want to make sure you focus on iTunes, because iTunes is the biggest platform for distribution for audio podcasts. They're big with commuters and things like that. So that's something to think about. I would say you want your show to go anywhere where your audience is likely to hang out. So like if you're doing a show about the collapse of civilization, then like conspiracy forums and Reddit like preparedness forums and things like that are a great place to go. If you're doing a podcast about space shuttle launches and things like that, then NASA forums are a place to go. And if you're doing something that's like iPad app reviews that's like 5-10 minutes long, then YouTube might be the best place to go. But just try to be everywhere where that community is going to be at. Look at it from the perspective of communities. I want to get into this community. I want them to recognize me as a valuable contributor to that community, and where do I find them? And if you think about it from that angle, it kind of becomes obvious where you should syndicate the podcast. There you go.
All right, the next question is, how would somebody know that I am new in the podcasting business?
Oh boy. Oh man, is that a hard one? Is that super hard or what? So the greatest thing that ever happened to podcasting, besides the iTunes directory, and I know some people don't want to hear that, but it's true. I mean, really, it's true. Having just all those users have it there has been big. But really, one of the biggest things that's happened to podcasting has been Twitter and Facebook and Google+. Because if you can start to build an audience there, give them value in those places, like, put links in the feeds, retweet interesting people, give people a reason to follow you on social networks, and then that sort of becomes your own platform to let your audience know when you have something new. So we can't, people can't, most of us can't afford to buy ads on places, and I'm not convinced ads do great anyways, but good organic social networking will do it. Again, if you have something relevant, like, for example, when the Linux Action Show made our 2012 Linux prediction, first place I went to post that was in the Linux subreddit over at Reddit. And then I also submitted to StumbleUpon and Linux Today, because I know those communities are interested. So go to where the people are at, and hopefully you'll get coverage. It's a hard aspect to podcasting for sure, because there is so much noise out there. It's really hard to get above it all. Okay. Is that it? Is that all our questions?
Yep, that's everything.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody who sent those in. There's a few different ways you can send those in. You can hit me up on any social network you like. go over to bit.ly/Chris Fisher to get links to my profiles, or you can email me, chris@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or like a ton of you guys did, is use that new contact link. That's where most of these questions came from. Just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com. At the top of the front page, or kind of at the top, there's a menu there where you can hit contact and fill out the form and select in-depth look, and it goes to me. And we'll ruminate on those, and we'll have some future questions. I think next week I'm going to do a look at retro gaming. So if you've got a retro game from like the 80s or 90s, maybe even the early 2000s that you love, and maybe I can even feature here on the show, let me know about those. Leave a comment wherever you watch those, and I'll take those in. Because I think the DOSBox stuff is inspiring me to go retro again, so I think next week we're going to dive into that. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Ange, well, thanks for joining me.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to everybody for sending those questions, and I think those are good, and I hope they help. And if you start a podcast, or if you started a podcast recently, let us know about it. Probably a great way to do that would be to stop by the faux show Wednesday nights.
Yep.
And let us know in the chat room.
8 p.m. Pacific.
Yep, over at jblive.tv. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of An In-Depth Look, and I'll see you right back here next Saturday.